Hello guys, so welcome again to the channel. Happy New Year to you all. This is my first video of the year and I really appreciate the support I got on this channel last year. So on my community, I did ask what kind of video will you guys like to see more on the channel this year. And although most votes went for all of the above, but the second best is tips and tricks on how to get better sound. So I thought let me actually put this video out so that we can look at one of the tips and tricks you can get a better vocal. Especially people recording at home, because the problem with most equipment home studio owners use is because they're on the cheap side, which is quite understandable because they cannot afford the expensive stuffs which most big studios use. You know, like most average microphone will cost you from 500 up, which is even considered cheap as well. But most home studios obviously cannot afford that to start with. So they normally go for things like Rode NT1A, which is £150 or less, and other mics of such range. But the problem with such mic is the high end is quite a bit harsh to the ears. It's not very musical, and also the mid range can sound a bit hollow, and the low end lacks. It basically lacks low end. So when you listen to mics like, say, the cheaper Thomann, which is the 103 TLM 103, you still feel like the mic has got body. Whereas when you compare it to something like Rode NT1A and maybe the Perception AKGs, you notice that they sound thin, which we are looking to address here in order to actually get professional sound. Because if you don't have a vocal that is weighty, you know, like heavy, we'll struggle to actually compete with the drums, the 808s, and so many other instruments. How do you combat this? Obviously, one being compression. But another big thing that actually help is saturations, you know, and not just using one saturation. You need to use multi-layer saturation to get this, because if you start using one saturation and crank it too up, it affects, or should I say, makes the sound even bad than it was when you inserted it. So let me show you what I've done to this vocal to actually get it to sound weighty, and then we will listen to it how it sounded without.
Life's not a bed of roses. Life's not just funfair. For this street, I'll be novice. I want showcase my showbiz. That's how I met this girl, had to butter. He come be sessional like butter. As I try to enter helmet. She tell me, say, I don't speak vernacular. That vernacular, if you know it, you could say it. You're supposed to know, say my language.
As you can see, with the few plugins that I've turned off, the vocal still sounds okay, but not as weighty as. Bearing in mind that there are a couple other ones which I've actually used for this purpose, but I've left them on. Something like this Distressor by UAD. I'm doing quite a bit of compression, but I'm also using the input to actually gain into this while backing down the output as well, which actually tries to add a bit more color to the sound. But the main ones which we need to look at on this video is these 3 saturation plugins, and then we will also look at this preamp, which is also adding color to the sound, and then these 2 Fairchilds by IK Multimedia and one by UAD. You might be thinking, why am I using different Fairchilds from different plugin makers? It's just because 2 of them doesn't sound the same, and bearing in mind that they didn't model the same Fairchild. Basically, way that hardware sound is not 100% the same compared to like plugin, where if you pull a plugin, it always sounds the same no matter what. So let's actually look at what I've done to the first one. This is the Waves NLS channel, which is actually emulating the spike is SSL sound, and I've just added just 3 dB on the drive. Obviously, it might be a bit hard if I say let me do on and off, but I'll try to just gauge it in. Let's turn off the other plugins and just have these ones. The sound might be a bit lower now, but just bear with me.
Life's not a bed of roses. Life's not just funfair. For this street, I'll be novice. I want showcase my showbiz. And so I met this girl, had to butter.
If you notice, this actually sound quite subtle, that if you are not using a good monitors or headphone, you will not notice the difference that is added. But that's why I said we use multi steps, because one doesn't actually do it. Now we're putting in Vitamin, which is also another Waves plugin, and I'm focusing on this mid-range and a bit of the high, but more of this mid-range.
Life's not a bed of roses. Life's not just funfair. For this street, I no be novice. I want showcase my showbiz. And so I meet this girl, Hajipata. It can be session.
So now with these two together, the vocal is having a bit more weight compared to when they were not there. Let's now put the third one, which is the Acustica audio in collaboration with Studio DMI, which is Luca Pritolesi. This is the mixed version of Mix Saturator. Let's now have that in. I've got saturation 1 and saturation 2.
Life's not a bed of roses. Life's not just funfair. For this street, I no be novice. I want showcase my showbiz. And so I meet this girl,
Bearing in mind that this might sound a bit subtle now due to the fact that I have them behind all this processing, which the level this processing have got is what pushes into this, because the level is not there now. That's why I feel like this is not doing much. So let's just throw in all the levels and now let's bypass this on and off.
Life's not a bed of roses. Life's not just funfair. For this street, I no be novice. I want showcase my showbiz. And so I meet this girl, Hajipata. It can be session like Nkwata. As I try to enter helmet. She tell me, say I speak vernacular. That vernacular, if you know it, you could say it. Just supposed to know say my language. As you sweet for my mouth, not advantage.
One thing you notice is that mid-range. Immediately I push this on, the vocal actually sits up front on that mid-range. Then the next one is this 1973, which is emulation of a Neve preamp.
Life's not a bed of roses. Life's not just funfair. For this street, I no be novice. I want showcase my showbiz. And so I meet this girl, Hajipata. It can be session like.
So now the next two is compression, but this, I'm not actually using them more for the compression. It's just the tube sound that you get from 670 Fairchild. This is the IK Multimedia one.
Life's not a bed of roses. Life's not just funfair. For this street, I no be novice. I want showcase my showbiz. And so I meet this girl, Hajipata. It can be session like.
If you notice, it hardly moves. It's only when maybe the vocal tries to jump out too much that it moves just about -1 dB, but most of the time it's actually sat on that 0. But it's adding that tube color to the sound. I notice this IK Multimedia one, the tube sound a bit more silky, and the UAD one, the tube sound a bit more sort of sharp, if that makes sense. Like, not silky, but warm. I think warm is the right sound, not sharp. So let's have a listen to it.
Life's not a bed of roses. Life's not just funfair. For this street, I no be novice. I want showcase my showbiz.
If you notice, this one is doing more of compression because of that warmness. That's why I thought, let me use it to add a bit more compression.
Life's not a bed of roses. Life's not just funfair. For this street, I no be novice. I want showcase my showbiz.
So if I turn off all this, let's have a listen to it. And then I'll turn them on.
Life's not a bed of roses. Life's not just funfair. For this street, I no be novice. I want showcase my showbiz. And so I meet this girl, Hajipata. It can be session like Nkwata. As I try to enter helmet. She tell me, say I speak vernacular. That vernacular, if you know it, you could say it. Just supposed to know say my language. As you sweet for my mouth, not advantage. They know they learn and fuck.
So you notice that once we put all these plugins, it actually makes the vocal sound a bit more upfront and a bit more warm. So this obviously is why I thought, let me just make this video so that you can think of plugin not just by what it does, but what it adds. Why do I say that? Sometimes, say on my mix box, I might just throw in the Manly Massive Passive by UAD. I'm not actually boosting or cutting anything, but because they've emulated the tube characters, I just leave it there. And also maybe some of the transformers. It adds something. Even sometimes you might just throw in a tape plugin and not pushing the drive at all, but it adds something to the sound. So another thing that I actually have to drop here, which is a tip, is if you have any means to go to like place where they sell high-end studio equipments. Just go there and try out some stuff, because when I was down in London, what actually opened my eye to mix or think of mixing with plugin differently is when I visited a couple of times KMI Audio down in London, and also Digital Village, which is now DV247. So they normally have demo equipments that you can try out. So I normally go with some of my mixes, just go in there, try some of the preamps, try some of the compressors, the outboard EQs, and the way he actually interacted with my sound now make me think of plugin differently. Because before, while I was using all plugins, I actually had a different mindset. But immediately I used that outboard gear a couple of times, I actually ended up buying a couple of outboard gears, you know, things like the Drummer 1978 stereo compressor, and few of the TL audio stuff, and even picked up a Neve preamp then, because the way they interacted with the audio, you know, gave me a different perspective. So even if you go there, maybe if wherever you are and you have option to actually go to where they sell hardware equipments, just do it. Even if you end up not buying, but the experience that it gives you will now make you think of plugin differently, because most of these plugins are actually emulating that hardware equipment. So I hope this is helpful, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks once again. Bye now.